Okay. BBC, I don't know. I'm sure it comes with it.
Right. 1, 2, 3.
I'm George Galloway.
I'm Steve Topple.
And together we are Topple Galloway. Plenty to talk about today, Steve.
There is.
I wanted to start in the Azov Sea. Where, you might ask? Well,
Who owns
you
it?
may have as much cause to remember the Azov Sea as you do to remember Sarajevo, as you do to remember the Sudetenland. Both triggers of the First and Second World Wars, because the Azov Sea might have just triggered the countdown to World War III, in which case you won't need to bother, because there'll only be cockroaches left alive, because whilst we fought the Crimean War in the 1850s against a ramshackle autocracy called Russia, now we're confronting the thermonuclear armed, multiply nuclear warheaded Russian Federation. Yet it's staggering the equanimity with which so many Western politicians and opinion leaders, some of them it turns out on secret government PSYOP operations, the equanimity with which they are walking into what is potentially a good night. And public opinion is not yet woke to it. The proximate cause is the refusal of the Ukrainian authorities to inform, as they are legally required to do, the Russian authorities that they were sailing a set of boats, some of them military boats, through the Azov Sea, which is now and has always been Russian territorial waters. I stress always been, because the narrative is now that somehow this is connected to the so-called annexation of Crimea. But you've always had to get Russian permission to sail through their territorial waters in the Azov Sea. And the Ukrainians, presumably deliberately, as part of a provocation, sailed their boats into the waters. And of course the Russian Navy had to respond, was inevitably going to be respond, not least because Russia has billions invested in a bridge nearby, which Ukrainian terrorists have several times tried to destroy and pledged to destroy. Now, so far, so commonplace. The staggering thing, and I always keep coming back to this, Steve, the staggering thing for me is the sheer mendacity, in other words, lying, of Western media commentary on the event. The fact that they can say these things with a straight face, I'll give you just one. Every Western journal that has a pint has said, this is Putin trying to boost his popularity at home, which has fallen from 82% to 66%.
Shocking.
Number one, 66% approval rate is an approval rate to die for any leader in the world. Number two, Putin cannot run again for elected office, and he's just been elected. He's got a whole term ahead of him, and then he's done. Number three, the Ukrainian leader, the president, Poroshenko, has an 8% approval rating. 8! He's running in third place for a renewal of his presidential mandate, and his election's coming up in March. Putin's only 1 year elected. Poroshenko has to run again in March, but has now declared martial law, and may well be about to suspend, even cancel, the presidential elections, in which he's running third at 8%. So if anybody here's got some kind of incentive for popularity of creating a crisis, it's the leader of Ukraine. Not one single mainstream journalist has drawn attention to that point.
They haven't, but do we expect anything less? Because we were discussing this before the cameras started rolling, and I'll say it on this because I think it's kind of important to this whole narrative. When this coup with Poroshenko happened several years ago, I just only come onto Twitter, And this is one of the first sort of global events I was watching unfold, as it were. And even then, my novice head with regards to politics was watching all this unfold and was thinking, hang on a minute, there's something not quite right here. Essentially, these are neo-Nazis taking over the country, which at the time this was called conspiracy theory. Now we know that Poroshenko's administration...
Conspiracy theory is merely doubting the word of proven liars.
Exactly, yes. And that's been proven true. And of course, there's this whole narrative of Russia annexing Crimea. And I checked this morning, because I recall at the time the Crimean Prime Minister-elect asking Russia to help. That was my memory of it, and I was like, I'm sure that's true. And I checked the news, and at the time, even the BBC reported that Crimea had requested Russia's assistance. But that narrative is lost completely, and now Russia's annexed Crimea. And we're seeing the same narrative peddled out again, that it's somehow Russia that is the aggressor in all this.
Israel, by the way, annexed Jerusalem, and nobody ever mentioned
it. An eyelid.
They annexed the Golan Heights, and it's recognized by Western governments. NATO annexed Kosovo from Serbia. It's accepted. They're playing in the European Football Championships.
Yes. And the UK annexed half the world, but it was accepted because it was a British Empire. We won't talk about Diego Garcia, will we? Exactly. But I mean, the narrative is staggering, and it is very, very dangerous, as you say. But what's more interesting with the story, of course, as well, is that we've had this whole hoo-ha and the revelations about the Integrity Initiative, this PSYOP, which is going on to try and...
well named, isn't it? Because they're paragons of integrity. Orwell couldn't have made that up.
Slightly taking the piss.
Yeah. Let's have a secret PSYOPs funded by Western governments, purporting to be honest journalism, and let's call it the Integrity Initiative. War is peace, black is white, day is night.
I could mention a carry-on film every week.
You could actually.
To the West. I'm sure there's one here.
You could. And some big names in it. The foreign editor of the BBC, the foreign editor of Sky. That has nothing to do with the foreign policy reporting of the BBC and Sky, of course. Big names on the Times, in the Guardian. I mean, I know that most people long ago ceased to believe what they read in the mainstream media. But if you needed a reason to tip over into disbelief, the suspension of belief, this would be it. Because from now on, you will not know if any of these journalistic outfits are writing what they believe to be true, or they're writing what NATO and Western governments paid them to write as part of the Integrity Initiative.
Exactly so, and this is the whole sort of link with the situation in Ukraine, is that now this Integrity Initiative has come to light, as it were. Not that we should be surprised, really, that things like this go on. It just sort of undermines the whole narrative about the situation even more. But so, I'm going to ask you, because you're far more of an expert on this than I am. How do you think this is honestly going to play out?
It could be war. It could be war, because I think we're reaching a tipping point that Russia is being the victim of one slap in the face after another. I don't want to give you a history lesson or give the viewers a history lesson, but Gorbachev was promised by Reagan and by NATO that if he agreed to the reunification of Germany, that the NATO would not expand towards Russia's borders. This solemn and binding promise has now been comprehensively broken. British forces are in Ukraine. British forces are in the Baltic states. American forces are in 10 times the number of British forces all around Russia. So this is very difficult for the Russians to accept. But once they move from that to one provocation after another, one set of sanctions after another, one set of false accusations after another, we're reaching a tipping point where Russia will have to fight back, have to hit back. Because for them, well, let me just put it another way. If the Russians were all around Britain, if Russian ships and aircraft were circling Britain, and if all of Britain's neighbours were now Russian satellite countries, would we feel threatened? Wow. Would we do something about it? If Mexico and Canada became Russian satellite countries and Russian forces were stationed in Mexico and Canada, would the United States feel threatened? Now, I just put it in a way that none of these mainstream journalists would ever put it, but it's actually 100% the case.
Yep.
They wouldn't do it that way because they're filled with the Integrity Initiative.
I received a plethora of frantic text messages early on Tuesday morning before we started recording this from one Mrs. Galloway with dozens of links to the Daily Mail as suggested stories.
Doesn't mean it isn't true.
Well,
Now that we know what we know about the Times and the Guardian, you might be safer in the Daily Mail. There's no Daily Mail journalist in the Integrity Initiative.
That's a very interesting point. I think there's
you don't need to buy them.
No, exactly. Yeah, quite.
They're already bought and sold.
Where was I? Yes, so I received a plethora of Daily Mail links into my text inbox from Mrs. Galloway this morning with various stories we could talk about. Of course, the Daily Mail are perpetually outraged, as they always are, but they're even more incensed this week with the news that University College London Students' Union has dropped the term woman from its discourse and its vocabulary and has replaced it with a gender pronoun W-O-M-X-N,
Womixen, I would say. I mean, I've never actually heard anyone say it.
There's something, W-O-M-X-N, because basically, obviously, the inference is that woman is sort of misogynistic and patriarchal. Yes,
what about human?
Well, yes, I mean...
No more human rights.
No.
Womixen rights.
So the Daily Mail, that's all right. You carry on. The Daily Mail is outraged by this because it's snowflake students, they called it. But juxtaposing that story in the Daily Mail was another one from the Daily Mail about Harry and Meghan Markle's glorious country retreat.
It's a cottage.
It's a cottage, yes, apparently. In some circles I move in, a cottage means something else, but that's another story entirely. It's a glorious country retreat of Harry and Meghan Markle, and how wonderful this was, and where they courted, etc., etc. Without the slightest hint of irony, that of course Meghan Markle gave a speech a few weeks ago about women's suffrage and feminism, and yet so they're slamming the women's groups at University College London for changing this pronoun, but yet lauding Meghan Markle in another case. But there's also juxtaposing this with another story. There's a massive hoo-ha at the minute about a cafe called Nice Baps. The Nice Baps Cafe. Nice Baps.
Now you're into Carry On film.
Well, I've always
Does anyone watching this know what the other meaning of Baps is?
Baps.
It's a
Lovely
very
Baps.
1960s.
It is.
Kenneth Williams.
Yes, it's lovely Baps, matron. Yes, breasts, obviously. And so there's this hoo-ha about this cafe. Anyway, we digress slightly. Do we think, George, because I'm open to persuasion on this,
You're either way on Womixen.
I don't particularly care, really. I see.
You go out on your estate and tell the women on the estate, I'm no longer going to call you a woman.
Yeah.
I'm no longer going to call you women.
Yeah.
From now on, you're Womixens.
Yeah.
Well, apart from anything else, on the list of priorities for those Womixen on your estate, that one has to be number 1,999th, if not 10 times that.
Yeah.
Secondly, what kind of intellectuality is it that in this sea of troubles in the world today, that's what they have fixed on? Goldsmith College, University of London, have both banned, in fact, according to the Daily Mail, admittedly, the last time they mentioned the word woman on their website was like almost a year ago.
Yeah.
They have deliberately avoided the term women. I just think this infatuation with form rather than content, with identity politics rather than real politics, is what's got us in this state. If the students at the University College London instead of witch hunting my friend Chris Williamson MP, no platforming Chris Williamson MP as an anti-Semite, which is the most gross, grotesque, defamatory allegation possible. If they were concerned about the Womixans being shot down at the Gaza fence, or the girls, are we allowed to say girls? The junior Womixan being gassed by Donald Trump at the Mexican border. If they were in the real world instead of this fake, ridiculous world that they live in, we would not be in the mess we're in. And I'll make a prediction to you, as someone who, because I've unfortunately been doing this a long time, 9/10 or more of the zealots now revolting against the use of the word woman will 10 years from now be bourgeois members of British capitalist society, probably with a husband and 2 kids and a decent house and earning lots of money in the Integrity Initiative. That's my prediction.
Well, quite possibly. No, well, no. Look, my position on this is quite clear. I'm kind of, it doesn't set a fire raging in my belly that the Goldsmith and UCL have done this. Nor does it set a fire raging in my belly that the Daily Mail are so outraged by it. I'm kind of like, really? Because I agree with you that the whole identity politics the narrative and mantra that was pushed by the triangulation that we saw of Blair and Clinton in the late 90s and then into the noughties, this identity politics narrative where you had to identify with this and these, get your rights for this if you're in this community, and if you're in this community get these rights, and if you're in this community get these rights.
And turning these communities against each other. By definition.
And this is the point. And for me, that was an intentional move by the powers that be of the Blair-Clinton triangulation, because what it's essentially done, and we see the end game of this now, it has split the working class up completely, which it has done. And it's therefore led to the rise of UKIP and the prominence of groups like the EDL. It's led to Labour struggling to get the working class vote back at all. And if you look at the last general election 2017, the Conservatives mopping up the old UKIP vote. And it's ultimately, it's led to the increased capitalist corporatisation of our country. And so by therefore preoccupying themselves with what pronoun is correct to use, well, I don't really care.
What is wrong, by the way, with the word woman?
Oh, look,
in what way does it subjugate women to men, that word?
Well, look, I mean, putting...
I genuinely don't understand.
No,
I'm not being funny.
No, I know. I mean, if I try to put a feminist head on myself, I would say that obviously they're trying to further the decline of patriarchy in this country, and by attacking it at sort of every angle, if you like, they think they're doing something good. But ultimately, and I had this conversation with my beautiful girlfriend Nicola Jeffrey just the other night, actually, we were discussing this, and she made an excellent point. She went, the same as me, well, she doesn't care whether people are like this or if they want to do this, and she's not really concerned if people object or not. Surely the point is, if we all bloody argued for complete equality, where we had a completely egalitarian society where none of this was necessary, we didn't have to worry about pronouns, and we didn't have to worry about certain groups' rights and other groups' rights and blah, blah, blah. Surely if we argued for that and the end to rancid capitalism, that would solve all our problems anyway.
Well, it might not solve them all, but it would open the way to solving them all. Look, I get some things. I was reading to my little boy a book the other day. When I finished it, I actually said to his mother, are you allowed to say mother? Is there a mix of her? I said to her, that's a very traditional book. The males were all driving tractors and working machinery, and the women all had aprons on and in the kitchen and so on. And even I, someone of my age and class, could see actually this is reinforcing gender stereotypes in a bad way. And it turned out that this author, quite successful one, had been later into the 80s and so on. Some changes had been made to his work to kind of blunt or lessen that. So I get that. I'm not in favour of gender stereotypes, but I'm genuinely mystified why the word woman is thought to be somehow bad for feminism. If it was subman or some other, inferior, but woman, well, I just love womans.
But this is what happens, of course, when you read the Daily Mail. I'm off to find myself a nice little pair.
Very good. A brilliant payoff.
Nice pair of women.
Nice pair of baps.
Damn.
I thought, I've never seen the word baps. She had to ask me,
Oh, okay.
what does this mean? I had never seen the word baps in relation to breasts for 30 years.
No, it's really light, isn't it? Very carry-on camping.
But it's also short for Barbara, no? It can also be short for
No, it's
Barbara.
No, that's babs.
Yeah, I understand, but I mean, it's...
Totally different. Never confuse your babs with your babs.
Let me just quickly...
Okay, what's this one? £50 note and Mars.
Mars, yeah. Mars and the Chinese scientists, the DNA, there's been live resistance.
Is that story actually confirmed now? Because when I saw it yesterday, it was
You get a lot of anti-China stories that are false.
It was only Reuters.
Particularly about Muslims and
Was it
so on.
Associated Press?
What is the...
No.
What have they done? What have the Chinese done now?
They've,
Alter DNA in which way? To do what?
Make it resistant to HIV/AIDS.
Okay. And that's a bad thing, how?
Well, I mean,
yeah, let me see.
again, it's kind of like, I'm kind of like,
Nah.
really, they've probably been doing it for years and just not told us, or probably, do you know what I mean? Well, I suppose the argument is that, well, okay, if while this may be seen as progress, if it falls into the hands of sort of mendacious government,
The
no,
Chinese-
it's a conservative government.
So
then-
ethics debate, it's about ethics. Ethics debates going on as Chinese scientists claims first gene-edited babies were born. So they're born, that's the thing.
Right.
Chinese scientist says he created the world's first genetically modified human babies using a technique called CRISPR to protect the children from HIV. His university said his work seriously violated academic ethics. So...
Yeah, okay. Well, we don't have to have a point of view on everything.
No.
We can say
Yeah.
there's this, but there's also that. I mean, at first glance, I can't see what's wrong with editing DNA to make sure nobody gets HIV/AIDS. I'm struggling to find what's bad about that.
Yeah.
Except the obvious reason, but that reason exists in any case, that if you can do that, then you might edit it for something else.
Yeah.
But then I'd be against editing it for someone else.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And whether they edited the first one or not, they can still edit the second one.
Exactly. It's a
Slippery slope.
It's like the same as womanix, isn't it? Really, it's not really the issue. Isn't really that. It's the implications.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that's particularly got your goat this week?
No, I'm fixated on the Brexit process and what's happening in Parliament and whether we're going to get an election, whether Corbyn can win.
The thing is, if we talk about that, it's going to be out of date.
And it's also too boring. Everyone's heard it all ad nauseum. No, not really, not that I can think of, no. But I mean, we can have a good 5 minutes on this.
Well,
I just think
you previously already had 10 minutes as well, so you don't have much
We don't
time anyway.
have, neither of us has a firm point of view, but obviously we can explore the pros and cons briefly.
That's interesting. Of course, Lembit Opik has been in the news because he's thinking of running for Estonian president. Have you seen that?
For what?
Yeah. Lembit Opik, he's
Running to be president of Estonia.
has Estonian heritage, and apparently
You might get it.
Right.
Well, Mr. President Lambert Opik. Preston of Estonia, declaring war on Russia, attending NATO summits.
We'll send the cheeky girls in.
That's right, yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Cheeky girls, best of.
Who's leading on this? I'll do it. The world has descended into something out of a Mary Shelley book this week. We've had a landing on Mars with 6 minutes of terror, apparently, according to all the press headlines. Terror for this poor Mars rover.
It was 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that counts as terror.
Yes, that does count as terror for a robot. Anyway,
was that a man robot or a remixing robot?
I don't. I'm not sure what pronoun it used, George. So we've had terror for a Mars robot, and then we've had a scientist in China coming out and saying he's modified DNA, and we've had the first genetically modified births of children who hopefully he's made resistant to HIV and AIDS. Now, on the first story, Mars, I'm kind of like, really? We think...
I'm big on Mars. David Bowie's Life on Mars, one of my favourite tracks. But moreover, I think there was life on Mars.
Yeah,
there might not now be, but I have a hunch,
yes.
An educated hunch that there was. And if there was, how it ceased to be is obviously of grave importance to us.
Yes.
And it's also possible that in 500 years from now, maybe, all humans will be living on Mars because we're in the process, as you know, of making Earth uninhabitable by one means
find some other place to make the dustbin of our existence.
But you know, the discovery that there was water on Mars seems to me ineluctably to lead to the conclusion that there was once life there. If there isn't now, why not? And so I'm hats off to the Americans for landing this rover there. It's wonderful, a wonderful 1940s, 1950s name, rover.
Yes.
And I wish it Godspeed and all success. I must say I'm struggling a little bit, not just because I'm generally sympathetic to China, to see what they've done wrong in this genetic modification, unless you say that all genetic modification all DNA modification is wrong in principle, and I can't bring myself to say that. If you're going to alter someone's genes so that they can never suffer from HIV/AIDS, that sounds like a result to me. I mean, I don't know the science, but I think I know the morals, and if we are improving the lot of the human race, all humans, see, DNA editing to edit out girls and promote boys, or DNA editing to make all children have blonde hair and blue eyes like you. It's not, I respect you, of course, but I don't necessarily think the whole world should look like you.
No.
Or me.
No.
That's
a thought. Cloned hats.
The boys from Brazil. You know, that kind of use of DNA editing is clearly fascistic in its character. But if it's to stop anybody getting HIV/AIDS or suffering from any other dreadful and debilitating and fatal illness, I would have thought that was a good thing.
Yeah, look, I'm kind of a bit meh again about all of this, really. I see the inherent interest with Mars. Of course, I'm not completely opposed to solar exploration, as it were. It concerns me, as you say, that go and find another planet to ruin. We can't even manage the one we've got, so we're just essentially, we'll become squatters of the universe, just sort of bouncing around from planet to planet until we absolutely ruin them. But
maybe some of us are from Mars, you see. I mean, you want to go left field on this?
Well,
maybe you see, if Mars had a highly developed society and their planet was going baps up,
yes, baps up,
then they might have taken off and come here.
Well, there is that. There's a fascinating theory regarding that. I think, who was the guy's name? It was.
Was it von Daniken?
Yes, von Daniken.
Erich von Daniken.
Erich von Daniken. I've read.
Yeah, me too. I used to when I was a teenager. I read all these things. It is not impossible.
Yeah. For the viewers, quickly, this is. I'm fascinated by this guy. He's a really interesting character. This is a guy who his theory is that we all actually we were made by aliens, and that if you look at ancient architecture and archaeological sites,
yeah, the Incas in particular, which all their iconography is about, fire coming down from the sky and giant superhumans arriving and becoming demigods on Earth.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and of course,
who built the pyramids? I mean, that was one of these things that humanity at the time could not have built these pyramids.
Yes.
It did not have the technology to drag into place however many slaves you had in such perfect symmetry, such gigantic building blocks.
And how is it that the pyramids are aligned with certain constellation patterns in the same way that locations in Southern America?
Who would end up discussing this?
I know.
It is, look, as Shakespeare said, there are more things in heaven and earth than I've dreamt of in our philosophy, and I hold to that. There are many things as yet unrevealed, and what happened to the people, if there were people, or the life on Mars, perhaps better put that way than people. I'm not suggesting they were men and women's in the way that we know that they had BAPs or didn't have BAPs. Now, all of that is unrevealed. But if you have a giant planet with the right climate and the presence of what seems to be, we'll hear from Rover soon, water, you're going to get life.
Well, you are, and I mean, like I say, I'm kind of like, well, yes, this is very nice, and my brain moves on from it, as it were, because it's not my radar of importance. With regards to the DNA modification, it niggles me, as with most technological advances do, because, as you quite rightly point out, there's always the argument that it can fall into the wrong hands. And what is the real agenda in here? And I want to know who's funded this man, for starters, and what corporations have supplied the technology, and why this is being done. I mean, there's another side point to this as well, which is niggling me. It's that my understanding of HIV and AIDS is that the virus. So how has he modified people's DNA to be resistant to a virus? Because there's also a school of thought that the HIV/AIDS virus is also linked to myalgic encephalomyelitis, ME, and other syndromes which are chronic illnesses that could be viral based. So I'm fascinated as to how this guy has modified genes to make us resistant to virus, which confuses me slightly.
Wouldn't it be a good thing if we were genetically modified to resist all viruses?
Well, it would, but then surely...
Are there any good viruses?
No, but the argument would be that, well, okay, so in the same way immunisation and antibiotics haven't historically prevented us getting certain things, but then nature itself evolves and things become resistant to nature's own modifications.
Fair enough.
It concerned me, this meddling with nature and I don't know.
But we meddle with it all the time.
I don't believe my meddling has been correct, and it concerns me that
if I hadn't modified the temperature in here this morning, you would have needed to keep your coat on. If we hadn't meddled with the propensity of children to get polio in Britain, there'd be a lot more kids in wheelchairs and what we used to call calipers and debilitated by the polio virus. I mean, we have meddled in these things for good. For me, the question is, and unlike you, I'm a religious believer, so I do believe that there is a divine, there is a God. It seems to me the intention is what counts. Is the intention of this to do good, and to do good without discrimination? And I need to read more about it, but this Chinese scientist, on the face of it to me, is predisposed or is bent upon doing good, stopping people by some editing from being prone to this deadly virus. Well, it's no longer entirely deadly, but it's, of course, a very bad thing.
No.
If you can stop people getting HIV/AIDS, why not?
No, I hear you, and I don't disagree with your point. If his intentions are honourable and marvellous, for me, it's intentions of those who are not honourable in this world.
Yeah, you'll always get. That's why I said the boys from Brazil.
Yeah.
There is always, from my point of view, Satan, the devil, is present in the world. Evil is present in the world for those that are not believers, and you will always be in danger from evil people. And you could get a guy in the jungle of Brazil who's genetically modifying humanity to make a nation or a race of Hitlers, as that film depicted. But that's not going to be stopped by stopping good scientists from doing good things. Actually, humanity has the capacity to do a lot of good and a lot of harm, and life is a continual struggle between good and bad, in my opinion.
Who'd have thunk it? Mr. Topple, half the age but twice as cynical as Mr. Galloway. And that's it for this week's show. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter. It's at Mr. Topple, at George Galloway. And what's happening every Sunday now, George?
Well, Sundays are going to be important now. It is Socialist Sunday on Twitter, of course, don't forget that. But it's also the day on which everybody can see Topple Galloway. Of course, the Patreons get it much earlier in the week, and they get an extended version, and they get the offcuts, the blunders.
Blunders?
Yeah, it's only fair because they are keeping our platform alive. We're trying to build an independent media platform so that you and I don't have to go to the BBC. Oh no, it's only you that gets on the BBC nowadays. So obviously we've got to protect the rights of the patrons.
Yes.
But by Sunday, we reckon everybody has a right to see Topple Galloway.
And if that's not something to get your baps out for, I don't know what it is.
Whoa!
Very good.
Oh damn.
Love that.
I'd be lovely to carry on for.
Quite.
I think we've done well, actually. It was my father's influence, which was bizarre because he was such a sort of egalitarian commie. But he introduced me to carry on. No, he didn't. He bought me for my 15th birthday the video VHS of an audience with Kenneth Williams from.
Oh yeah.
Sort of, I think it's.
Well, Kenneth Williams is a very interesting person.
Brilliant, yeah, very fascinating. His diaries.
Don't take it off.
No, so was Hattie.
Yeah.
Hattie was a goer.
Yeah, very much so. They were all intriguing people.
Considering she was 20 stone.
Yeah.
You wonder how.
Yeah, quite. Yes.
Let's shoot just one more thing.
Just one more thing. If you needed any more evidence that the Department for Work and Pensions was absolutely out of control, as I record this on Tuesday the 27th of November, it's in court again for the 6th time in less than a year. 4 claimants are taking it to court over, yes, you guessed it, universal credit and its inequalities and discrimination that are inherently built into the benefit. Now, this is just the first couple of stages in a judicial review. We won't know the outcome of this for several months probably, but it just compounds the issue that the DWP and this government are essentially acting completely irresponsibly and with their cavalier attitude towards some of the poorest in society. I mean, I am actually staggered that the DWP is back in the dock again, but should I be surprised? No, because we're getting this from not only a department but also a government that is completely out of control.
Just one more thing. What or who should be on the £50 note? Well, on the principle that not many people ever see a £50 note, then I suppose it could be anybody, but the government have drawn up a short list of 3. The first is Margaret Thatcher. Let me dispose of that right away. It would bring the British economy down because people would be burning £50 notes all over Britain in protest, and that would be expensive, and it's probably not a good idea. The other is Stephen Hawking, late professor of the universe and definitely he needs maximum recognition. But I'm going for the third member of the shortlist, Alan Turing. Alan Turing played a decisive role, more important than almost anybody except Churchill himself, in winning the Second World War, because he was key to the cracking of the Nazi codes in the Enigma program. He also paved the way. It wasn't Al Gore that invented the internet. If it wasn't for Alan Turing, the internet wouldn't exist. But more important, even than these arguments, is this. The British state destroyed the life of Alan Turing because he was gay. They chemically castrated Alan Turing and imprisoned him for what are now perfectly legal pastimes, but were then a matter for the criminal law. So we owe Alan Turing big time, much more than a £50 note. I say, give Turing the gig.
Steve, who should be on the £50 note?
Oh my goodness. I would say I agree, probably Alan Turing. Yes, I think so. Certainly not Thatcher, obviously.
Good. That's a wrap.